We are in our, the fourth book, but the fifth video with an introduction. So we slowly but surely go into the Bible. We had introduction to the overview of the Bible. We had Genesis, we had Exodus, we have Leviticus, and now we are in the book of Numbers. Therefore, as the title suggests, the main idea of the book of Numbers is the numbering and arrangement of the camp of Israel before they got into wilderness, right after Exodus, and after, before they entered into the land. Yes and no. The thing is, between chapter 1 and chapter 36, we have 38 years. So we're slowly but surely kind of going into the wilderness toward the land. Then there is a crisis and people do not want to enter and they are somewhat punished, disciplined. Then there is a serious rebellion against the authorities of the camp. And then God solves that puzzle and basically appoints who will be in authority. And then slowly but surely, we are going out of the desert. We are not given the story about every station, though we have like 42 stations within the desert. And it's important to keep in mind when we have 42 generations in the lineage of Jesus, they are typologically related to 42 stations in the desert. And then we are getting out. So we have coming in probably about a year, and we have about similar period of time of getting out. We have almost no information except naming the stations of the situations that happened within those 38 years. Couple things about the title. It is important to know that, as I said, in English, as it follows the Greek translation, we've talked about this in introductory lesson of Septuagint. This sign in the biblical theology has nothing to do with the size of your t-shirt. It's not large, extra, extra. It's 70 for 70 translators of the Hebrew text of the Old Testament into Greek. Okay, so in Septuagint we have numbers. It's numbering. Okay, but in Hebrew, the word is very important. If you will sound it right, it's be mid bar, which is in the desert or wilderness. Okay, therefore, every time when we have this phrase in the wilderness in the Bible, we are somewhat brought back into the wilderness of Exodus, into the first original wilderness. Couple examples. Example number 1 is, of course, Isaiah chapter 40. In Isaiah chapter 40, we see the voice of the one who is crying in the wilderness. And you are very familiar with this text, I'm sure, because we use it every Lent. Okay? Verse 3. Okay? A voice cries, and in ESV it's says, a voice cries, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord. Though you can, with the same authority, translate it a different way. You can say, a voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. And I would prefer this kind of translation. So we have an idea being in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, the voice cries, how you prepare a way of the Lord, or for the Lord, of the Lord. Okay? So how do you travel through the wilderness being godly and still faithful? That's thing number 1. Therefore, every time when we read New Testament passages related to John the Baptizer, we are in the in the wilderness theme. Let's see at least one example. Probably the best example would be in Gospel of Matthew in chapter 3. Okay? In those days, chapter 3, verse 1. In those days, John the Baptist, or baptizer, came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. For this is who was spoken by the prophet Isaiah when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. So even New Testament interpretation of Isaiah says that the voice is coming in the wilderness, and then there are words. So that's an important thing, and let's write it down. Matthew 3, 1 through 3. But also, we do know that first John begins his ministry. He baptizes Jesus, that inaugurates him as the high priest and the minister. And then that's very interesting that chapter 4 of Matthew also begins, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Okay, so we see that this theme of being in the wilderness is very prominent, as I said, both for Isaiah and for some of the passages of New Testament. So when we think about this as a title, we kind of want to see what kind of themes we can pick up in different parts of the Bible. Now, more into main narrative of the text. Okay, as you have in your handouts, and you will find the link where you can find a handout in the description box. It will be on the blog post from our church, but you can download it and print it out. You can see that we have 12 parts. They are chiastically ordered. Just for those of you who do not know how to spell this miraculous word, it's chiastic. Okay, so the order is chiastic. That means that the outer parts parallel with each other and kind of go slowly toward the center. So this is the outline, and slowly but surely we're going to fill it out. I probably will move this one over here. Okay, so A and A prime. In A we have numbering, yes, or census and arrangement of the camp in the wilderness after they crossed Red Sea and after they built the tabernacle. A prime concerns with, again, sensing or numbering and arrangement of the camp before they go into the land. Okay? There are a couple important things here. For example, all of that sets up Israel as the heavenly host, or let me put it a little bit different. When the Lord is present within the camp or in the midst of the camp, the presence of the Lord within arranged and numbered people of Israel turns them into God's host or God's army. And it's not simply regular army, it is God's heavenly army. How do we know it is associated with some heavenly numbers? There have been papers published, and I will give you only one simple example. You can, if you Google, you can find more information on that. But at this point, one example probably will suffice. If we'll go into chapter 1, verse 36 and 37. We find that the tribe of Benjamites, were 35,400 men. Yes? Right. Yes. What a pleasant surprise. Now, if we'll get rid of those zeros, what we'll have with the numbers is 354. What is 354? 354 is an important number for a lunar year. And we know that the calendar that Israelites use, and we've talked about this in our previous video, so if you want to go and know anything on the biblical calendar, you always need to consult only with one chapter. It's Book of Leviticus, chapter 23. Okay? And you will see that the calendar that Israelites use, the biblical calendar, is both solar and lunar. You have lunar months within solar year. It is solved by adding another month every some years. You add another 12th month Adar, with some regularity, let's put it this way. So, this is the lunar year. Now think about this. In Genesis 1, verses 14 and 16, it says that the God placed in the sky sun, the light, greater light, smaller light, so sun, moon, and stars to rule the days, the months, and the periods, and seasons, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now think about this. Stars are for ruling. Now, Benjamin is associated with the movement of the moon. We know that the moon by itself doesn't shine. It shines with the reflected light of the sun. And that's an important. It is important for us to remember when we will come to 1 Samuel chapters 8 and 10, when we will see the first king of Israel. And the first king of Israel is, yes, the first king of Israel is Saul, who was from the tribe of Benjamin. Now think about this. Did Saul ended up with a dynasty that could shine long and extend the influence through years? No, not really. He had his term and then it was over. Now the rule moved to a representative from Judah to David. Okay? So when we see that the Benjamites are given the somewhat prominent number, but not dominant number, it gives us a clue when we come to Saul. He's not going to rule for long. Okay? Similar thing we can find in Genesis. Okay? In Genesis 5, we have a guy, and his name is Enoch. Okay? In verse 23. Who lives 365 years. Okay? And we know that 365 is associated with the solar year. So these kind of readings are, let me reverse it. These kind of readings were somewhat familiar to the people of Israel in the time when they spent in the desert, and also those who would read those texts after. So this was not a surprise. Now, as I said, we have census in the beginning and the ordering of the camp in the beginning, and we have census and the ordering in the end. In the very end, we have a very interesting story that in the chapter 27, the daughters of Slavka come to Moses and say that they would like to make sure that they will inherit the land that should be given to the father, even though father died and they have no brothers. And Moses consults with the Lord, and the Lord says they have a right. So when we hear the claims that Bible is so, patriarchal would be the term, so man-centered or man male-oriented. This is just simply not true. We see how biblical rules and regulations are very concerned with the benefits and the good life of women within the camp, and actually their rights are very, very, very much protected. Okay, so that's A and A prime. B and B prime relate to each other because in B, in the second part of chapter 10, we see how Israel leaves the Sinai. So they were still stationed at Sinai where they got 10 commandments, where they got the idea of the tabernacle, this portable sanctuary, and then they built it and it was dedicated. Now, when the pillar with the presence of God appeared in the tabernacle, they were ready to be on the march, and that's where they leave. Now, block B prime, chapters 22 to 25, tells us how they come toward the land. So before they are numbered, they are coming toward the land, to the land of Moab. And there is faithfulness here and unfaithfulness here. Now, blocks C and C prime. In C, we have an example of bad leadership, especially within the prominent family, the family of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. You do know and you remember that Moses is a younger brother of both Miriam and Aaron. So three of these guys do not really show a great example of leadership to solve some of the matters within the camp. And then chapters 13 and 14 tell us what happened when the people of Israel sent 12 spies into the land, and they checked it out, they brought some goods back, they brought such a great vine with such an awesome grapes that people were amazed. Yet, when they began to spread bad rumors about the land, God was furious, and he said that everybody will die who are 20 years and older will die in the wilderness. Why 20 years and older is mentioned? Because at the age of 20, people were assigned to be in army. They did not have like a regular military army. It was more of a militia. The people would gather at appointed times of troubles. But when you think about the conquest, that's those people who should have conquered the land. Since they were unfaithful, God makes sure that they will die over there. And we see the replacement of this leadership in chapters 20 and 21. We see in chapter 20 how first one who died was Miriam, and then after Miriam dies, we immediately find water. It's very interesting that in the Bible, women are very closely connected with water. When Abraham in Genesis sends his slave to find future wife for his son Isaac, he finds Rebekah at the well. Then later on, when Rebekah sends off her son Jacob, he finds his beloved wife Rachel at the well. Moses finds his future wife at the well. He is himself protected by his sister by being placed into the water, and then daughter of Pharaoh finds him at the well. And then there is a very important story in the Gospel of John in chapter 4. Jesus finds a woman of Samaria by the well. So that's just an interesting thought. So we need to figure that out. So first Miriam dies, and then we see how Moses, instead of asking the rock, strikes the rock with his rod twice. And then God really tells him that you definitely are not going into the land. And that would be an important theme for our next Bible study, for our next presentation on the book of Deuteronomy. in the first introductory chapters of Deuteronomy, Moses tells 3 times that is because of you, or for your sake, God told me that I will not be able to come into the land. So look forward for Deuteronomy, and we will discuss it there. And then Aaron dies. When Aaron, the high priest, dies, it is important to understand that when the high priest is replaced, interestingly enough, immediately we gain the victory against the king Aaron. So one more time, Israel counted or numbered and arranged with Yahweh God, with the Lord in their midst, in their presence. Actually, this presence of God in the camp transforms them from a simply bunch of Bedouins who are traveling from one place to another place into a holy army on the march of the sacred or holy war. So we have the victory here. Now, we need to pay attention to blocks D and D prime. In D and D prime, in D, we have rules of proper conduct. And then in D prime, we have rules of proper purification, which leads us to E and E prime. In E, we have a sign of royal priesthood. Let me explain it to this. Let me go into this. Let me explain it a little. For example, in the first letter of Peter, in chapter 2, Peter addresses the idea that now, with Messiah coming, with Messiah appeared to the people, now we all transformed in this royal priesthood. He actually borrows the term from Exodus, from chapter 19 and 20, when we see people arranged around the mountain Sinai. What was the difference between priests and, let's use our term, and lay people? Even in the clothing, there is a rule and regulation in the book of Leviticus that you should not intertwine the threads of linen with the threads of the wool, okay? That makes perfect sense. Because after a while, you want to wash your clothing, and if you will wash something with the mixed threads, what will happen? It will shrink, and it will shrink unevenly. You don't know what kind of weird clothing you will end up with. But there was one person whose clothing should be taken care of very carefully. I don't know how to say it properly, whatever. It is a high priest. His outer garment, which he would wear on the very rare occasions, was made both out of linen and the wool threads. And yet, in the book of Numbers, right here, we see the rule and a regulation, which has 2 important dimensions. Dimension number 1. Dimension number 1 is, let me show it to you. That's how it looks like. That the outer covering of a regular Israelite looks like now they used in the synagogal circles, like a prayer shawl. Usually it's a bit wider. I have a shorter version of that. But in each corner, and it's all made of linen, really cool. If you have a hot day, you just put it above yourself. It kind of cools you down. So this is linen. But then what I have here, and it's what said in Numbers concerning tassels, that you need to make tassels. And the last part of verse 38 is to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. So I have a blue wool thread that goes through each corner, 4 of them. So that means that every Israelite was somewhat close. Not exactly the office of the high priest, not exactly the office of the priest, but we see those people in the office of the royal priesthood. Why it is royal priesthood? Because they were serving the king, therefore royal, King Yahweh, as priests for all the nations. How do we see it? We see it in many different ways, and I will show you just one simple example. Actually, in the book of Numbers, we see a ritual in Numbers 25. We see a ritual for the Feast of Booths. Okay? So at the 7th month, beginning with 15th day, for 7 days, they need to sacrifice X number of animals. And it's very interesting. So in the first day, okay, let me do it this way. So 7 days of sacrifices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So in the first day, they need to sacrifice, let's make it a little bit more colorful. They had to sacrifice 13 bulls. Okay? On the second day, it would be 12, then 11, then 10, then 9, then 8, and then 7. If you sum it up, what you will end up is 70. For 70 nations on earth as we see them depicted in Genesis 10 and 11. So in 2 chapters, whenever you see 70 in the Bible, this number, one way or another, usually refers to 70 nations of the earth. Okay? And 70 is 7 multiplied by 10. Sometimes the related number is 7 plus 10, also used. So it's 17. So 70 and 17 are not identical, but related numbers. So what I wanted to say is, Israelites as a group of people serves to the King Yahweh, therefore they are royal. They serve as a priest because they sacrifice and pray for other nations. And that's why even in what we call Old Testament, or in the Jesus' days, that was called Tanakh, and you can see the explanation of what Tanakh is in our first video, in Introduction to the Overview. They served those 70 nations by praying to God and sacrificing animals for them. Okay? You just can see 7 plus 13 is 20, 8 plus 12 is 20, 9 plus 11 is 20, 3 20s and 1 10, you end up with 70. So 70 nations of the earth. And that's what tells us, this is one of the things that tells us that Israelites are royal priesthood. Now it is given to the church. So now we pray for all of the nations. We do not sacrifice animals, but we send missionaries and we translate the Word of God into their vernacular. And as a reflection of that, what we find in chapter 18, we have, this is for everybody as a royal priesthood, but here we have duties and rules for priests and Levites. Okay? Now, we come to the center of the book. And in the center of the book, we find the rebellion. We find the rebellion of the guy named Korah. Okay? And the Korah was one of the Levites. He was given an appointed task at the tabernacle, but he wanted to have more. Okay? To understand the whole situation, we need to kind of step back from our current or modern understanding of the priesthood or pastors or ministers and so on and so forth. Right now, to be a minister, you can be from any kind of family. You can be Irish, you can be German, you can be American in general, you can be Russian, or you can be from Uzbekistan, or you can be Chinese. Okay? From any kind of family, any kind of nationality, as long as within our church body, what we do is we have people who are getting bachelor degrees, then they are sent to seminaries and they get their master's degrees, And if everything goes fine, it's not only about the brain, it's also about the heart and skills and call to serve within the church. Okay? They are ordained and they can be pastors. Okay? In those days, in the days of Numbers, as well as Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and throughout Tanakh, the only people who could be priests should be related by blood to the lineage of Aaron. Not only from the tribe of Levi, but they have to be directly related to Aaron. Okay? So we see this, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 1. Parents of John the Baptizer, or Yohanan probably, that his name was in Hebrew, both Zechariah and Elizabeth, it says that they both were descendants of Aaron. Though Zechariah was not a high priest, he was from a proper priestly lineage. Therefore, it makes John an appropriate, fully right priest within the rules of the Bible. And it's very interesting kind of side note to consider. If Mary is a relative to Elizabeth, who is also from the lineage of Aaron, that means Mary is from the lineage of Aaron and from the tribe of Levi. So, therefore, by mother, Jesus is somewhat a priest, or a person who can be considered for a high priest position. That's a thought to think about. But going back, so Levi is not a priest and is not a high priest. He is a Levite. Korah is a Levite, and therefore he has some duties, but he wants more, not necessarily responsibilities. He treats ministry not as a responsibility. He treats ministry as more a power. So he tries and attempts a power grab. He comes and tries to push out the Aaron as the high priest. Okay? There is an appeal to the Lord, and the Lord says that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, chapter 17, as a response to that, "Speak to the people of Israel and get from them staffs, one from each father's house, from all their chiefs according to their father houses, 12 staffs. Write each man's name on the staff, and write Aaron's name on his staff." Okay, that's a separate thing. So they contest those who want to be in charge. And what happens is staff is in the ground, and the staff of Aaron blooms. And everybody else who were associated with the rebellion of Korah were punished. And we see that in the end of chapter 16, he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. So total, we have a loss of 14,700 people. So that's an important story of this attempted power grab, and how God intervened, and how God proved that Aaron is the chosen one. Okay? So that's overall the structure and the flow of the text. And a couple more things that I would like to share more with you is, first of all, we need to see that the book of Numbers kind of on one hand picks up on the themes that have been said before, and then gives a proper development of those themes into the future. One of them, as we've talked, is the theme of lights, or theme of stars. We see this theme picked up from Genesis 5 through Numbers into, for example, up to the very last book, where we see that in book of Revelation we see that angels are also related with lights, or with kind of star associations in the book of Revelation. There is also an important thing that we see here is the theme of proper power and authority that is God given. So God has given power and authority to the people in the ministry. And when we see that this Korah's rebellion against Aaron was an important and somewhat suffering event for Israelites on one hand, but on the other hand, it's him who had to bear this responsibility for this rebellion. It does not mean that everybody who is associated with Korah would be dismissed from any kind of ministry. For example, let me bring you a simple example. We have in the Psalms few Psalms, in the book of Psalms, we have few Psalms that are written by the sons of Korah. For example, it is Psalm 84 and 85. Okay? Where would we write it? Right here. Psalms 84 and 85. The subscription to the Psalms, it says, for example, 84, to the choir master, according to the Gittith, a psalm of the sons of Korah. The fact that we have those God-inspired songs by the sons of Korah means that it is Korah's responsibility for rebellion. His sons who survived this rebellion, who were godly and good psalm writers, had find its place within the realm of Israel, of the worshiping community of the Lord. There is one more important thing that I would like to share. We all know that at the very end of the regular worship service, we hear the blessing from the pastor. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. This blessing we actually find in the book of Numbers. It is found in the book of Numbers chapter 6. At the very end, it is appointed, those words are appointed by God to Aaron first, and then through him to all the priests and high priests and to the current pastors. That's how we bless the people of God. Now, to conclude, I would like to share the things that I wrote from the relevancy of the book. The book of Numbers shows that God takes the sin of disobedience very seriously, especially done by the leaders, priests or princes. And yet, regardless of the people's disobedience, God will execute or complete his plans. So, thank you for watching. Leave your questions or comments down below in the comments section. Stay tuned.